All right, well, thank you, Gwen, for the honor of the closing keynote. And I'll try to make this as quick as possible. I think I have 15 minutes. Is that right? And then the judges will come back and we'll be done. Okay, well, you know, it's amazing. The last time I was on this stage was 4 years ago, and I was pitching JFDI. And it's amazing to think just how much has happened since then, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into startups. Hundreds of millions of dollars have come out. There have been dozens of exits, big and small. Last year, Viki got bought by Rakuten. This year, Zopim acquired by Zendesk. So we're starting to see some trends, right? For example, you should pick a name for your startup somewhere near the end of the alphabet if you want to get acquired. But seriously, I want to zoom out and place the last couple of days into a larger context. So I'm going to zoom all the way out to 200,000 years ago. Our ancestors were hunter-gatherers chasing woolly mammoths, right? And we eventually ran out of mammoths, so we invented agriculture 12,000 years ago, which led to the nation state. Some of you may be familiar with this concept. And that led to tax incentives and government funding. So I'm going to talk in the next 15 minutes about how all these things connect. So we like to say that hunter-gatherers, right? Traditional VC is a little bit like hunter-gatherers because VCs go out and they try to hunt down a great startup. They hunt in packs and they lie in wait, and the startups sort of like walk across in front of them, and sometimes they will say, yes, I'll pounce, I'm going to invest in this one. But my job is different. I'm a farmer, right? We are farming startups. Paul Graham says we are mass-producing startups. This is not a bad thing. We mass-produce startups in kind of the same way that movie studios mass-produce movies, and some of them are pretty good. Like YC has only been around less than a decade, and already they've produced Dropbox and Airbnb. So just as farming has changed human civilization in a relatively short period of time, acceleration is also changing early-stage venture funding. Because for the first time in history, it's possible to systematize innovation and teach entrepreneurship in a structured way. And that's what this whole lean startup revolution has been about. Lean startup gives us a system and a method for building a business. And if you are an engineer, then you can be an entrepreneur. This is the story of Silicon Valley, and this is the story of JFDI. You know, Lean teaches developers to talk to customers. We teach hackers to hustle. And we've found that the lean startup approach works just as well in Southeast Asia as it does in the US. By the end of this year, we will have launched over 50 companies, and by the end of next year, we will have done 100. And 60% of our startups go on to raise seed funding in the $500,000 range. So where do they come from? They come from all over Asia, India, Korea, France. This year we have a team from Lithuania. What they all have in common is that they've got a big idea and they're looking for funding, whether it's $500,000 seed or $2 million Series A. But it's not easy, right? As you know, as you've just seen, it's really tough to stand up to the questions of the investors and prove that you've got a market, a model, traction, channels, all this stuff. And because they don't have profits, they haven't built a full team, it's really difficult to convince investors. So what JFDI does using Lean is we help them grow their business to the point where they can find real funding so they can keep growing. And we help them learn how to pitch, and we help them learn to come on stage and answer questions from investors like these. So if there are people in the audience who are thinking about doing a startup, you know, whether you're working on your prototype or already have 1 million downloads, come talk to us. So I'm supposed to talk about Lean in Asia, and before I talk more about Lean, I want to talk about Asia. And one of the problems with being a young entrepreneur in Asia is that you probably live at home, together with some older people who probably don't approve of your lifestyle choice, right? And this will create some degree of roommate friction. But let's look at it from their point of view, right? If you grew up at a traumatic time when there were no jobs available back in the 1960s, 1970s, then to survive, you had to start a business. And this is called necessity entrepreneurship. You did it because you had to. And when you have kids, you are going to say to them, I worked so hard so that you can afford an education. You will have a luxury that I never had. You get to choose your career, right? Because when I get old, you are my retirement plan. And so for that generation, entrepreneurship is a dirty word, right? When you tell them that you want to do a startup, they will say, what, you want to be an entrepreneur? Let me tell you something. I was an entrepreneur and it sucked, right? So if you are the first generation in your family to go to university, when you graduate, you don't actually have the risk profile of a 25-year-old. If you are supporting your parents, and don't get me wrong, I'm like all for supporting your parents, you actually have the risk profile of a 52-year-old. And that is why there's kind of a generational conflict. The previous generation have your whole life planned out. Step 1, go to school. Step 2, get a job. And then step 3, every month, $1,000, right? So, for them, entrepreneurship, no, that's not part of the plan. Why did we even bother sending you to university if you are going to be jobless? Right? So this is a true story from Korea. There was this entrepreneur who had to close down his business before he was allowed to marry his girlfriend. Because if you don't have a real job, you're not a safe bet, we can't let our daughter marry you. So this is what I call the topsoil situation, which is my theory that a society needs a certain amount of wealth to even begin to allow its children to pursue their passion. And unfortunately, this is where Asia is right now. And it takes time to accumulate that wealth. Right, back in the 60s and 70s on the left, we had necessity entrepreneurship. And then the generation after that had to go to med school and law school. I have 3 older brothers, and they're all doctors. But now, opportunity entrepreneurship is beginning to take off. And when the society is wealthy enough, you get Bill Gates dropping out of Harvard to go do Microsoft. You get Mark Zuckerberg dropping out of Harvard to go do Facebook. And can you imagine a Singaporean dropping out of Harvard? I mean, it's basically illegal, right, for a Singaporean to drop out of Harvard. So, but how come these guys could do it, right? So Mark Zuckerberg's dad was a dentist. His mother was a psychiatrist. Bill Gates, this is William H. Gates III, right? His dad was a lawyer who started his own law firm. These people don't need $1,000 a month, right? So compared to that, maybe Singapore just doesn't have that level of wealth. Or maybe we don't think we do, which is a slightly different thing. Maybe we actually do have that level of wealth, but going from third world to first in one generation, the first choice is still a government job, right? Which is funny because even Lee Kuan Yew says that there is actually too much talent working for the government, and maybe what we should do to encourage entrepreneurship is fire half of them, and then they'll go off and start their own companies. All right, so I think if you talk to any government official, they'll probably say, oh, no, MM Lee was just joking about that. We don't actually need to be fired. We'll just keep supporting entrepreneurship. But let me just give you a statistic, right? Let me just put this out there. The total size of the entire U.S. venture capital industry, if you look at assets under management, is about 200 billion USD. It sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually less than Temasek and GIC put together. Right? And together, Singapore's 2 sovereign wealth funds are actually bigger than the entire U.S. venture capital industry. So I think we do have the wealth in our country at a very high level. We do, right? And this isn't just the Singapore example. All around Southeast Asia, developing economies are climbing the curve, and they're producing educated young people who want to follow their passions. Which is why teams from all around Asia come to JFDI in search of opportunity, right? Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, we've got all of Asia represented here. And I really respect them because what they're doing is hard, right? Doing lean is hard. Now, the lean startup methodology requires a lot of discipline, but it's better than the traditional model of innovation, right? Where normally you spend 2 years building version 1, and then you go try to sell it to customers. And then the customers say, okay, that's nice what you've done. It sort of reminds me of what I actually want to buy, so let me tell you about that. And then you go and you pivot, right? And then you spend another year building version 2. And so you've ended up, you spent 3 years before you make your first sale. And so the big idea behind lean is skip building version 1 and go talk to customers and find out what they want to buy, and then you go build that, all right? So that's lean. See, I just saved 2 years out of your life, and you didn't even have to buy the book. But okay, so I'm glossing over a lot of theory, right? There's actually more to it than that. Each startup at JFDI gets about 1 hour per day of mentoring and coaching, and through that mentoring, it is possible over 100 days to turn engineers into entrepreneurs, because it's a lot easier to teach programmers how to do business than to teach MBAs to program. And so you can go out and you can read these books yourself, and you can start your own company and do lean. You can also come to an accelerator, and we will sort of drip feed this to you just in time. And I'm not going to talk about this now. We've got a whole quiver full of methodologies that we use at JFDI, from recruitment to admission to sort of growth theory. We're data-driven. We try to track the progress of the teams as they go from one experiment to the next. This comes from Steve. He talks about how you can grow. No matter what your startup does, you can grow through these stages until you hit number 9, you will get funded. All right? So we help teams tell their stories and get to the heart of their innovation. We use all these tools, and by the time they're done with JFDI, they are pretty much professional entrepreneurs. They can, in theory, go into any domain of innovation, and they can start to create value. So, just one example is this team that came to JFDI from New Zealand, and they came in with one idea, and they spent a couple of weeks testing their idea, and they found out that their idea sucked, and nobody wanted to. So they ended up... Hello? Okay. There's a good example of switching when you need to, right? So they switched to a different idea, and they pivoted, and now they are doing well. I think they're up to, this is old. Now they're up to 18 employees, and they're growing 25% a month. And so it proves that the method does work, right? And so this stuff, it can be done, and you can do it. It's not as difficult or as mysterious as it used to be. So another reason I have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs is that Southeast Asia is fundamentally hard, right? Southeast Asia is a very exciting place at a very exciting time. There are 1 billion people going online for the first time with smartphones instead of desktops. And they want the same things that everybody else wants. They want entertainment, education, payment, business infrastructure. And if you think about it, India, very exciting market, 1.2 billion people. Southeast Asia has about half as many people. It's 600 million. But the GDP is about the same. In both cases, it's about $2 trillion. And it's exciting because half the population in Southeast Asia is below the age of 30. So this is the sort of the golden market that everybody's looking for. But these billion people are split up across a dozen countries. And if you think about how easy is it to grow and scale a business, the guys in the US, the guys in Silicon Valley have it really easy. I mean, they've got one currency, one country, one landmass, one language. If you build it, you can just sell it to 300 million people. And the guys in Europe, they've figured out, okay, let's do the euro thing. We've got one currency now, and they've got a regulatory environment, so it's easier, right, to do Europe. It's not as easy as the US. But Southeast Asia and Asia are really hard. You've got 11 countries, and I'm not even counting India. You have something like 50 languages, and each country has its own currency. So doing business out here is still not as easy. There was a market expansion track yesterday. In fact, there were something like 6 market expansion tracks. And I said, why is there a market expansion track for each country? Why shouldn't we just have one market expansion track for all of Southeast Asia? But we're not there yet. So in theory, we're supposed to have an ASEAN economic community by 2015, sort of done top-down with government leadership. But I think in practice, it's going to be up to the private sector to lead a lot of this stuff, whether it's logistics, or payments, or language translation. These are real, these are big problems. And I'm glad to see that there are companies tackling this, right? These guys got funded, 2C2P is doing well. So I'm glad to see this infrastructure being built, because it lays the ground for all the rest of us to do things on top of that. And so that brings me to the next point, which is why Singapore when all of the really big markets are outside? And I think the answer actually is one area where it's really nice to have such a pro-innovation government is because some innovations actually require regulatory approval, right? And these are the kinds of innovations that are accepted or rejected at the level of the entire society. Like B2C is really easy, B2B is kind of hard, and then imagine, selling something to 3 million people at once who have to vote on this, right? So Uber, for example, is running into trouble with the law. Airbnb is running into trouble with the law, and we are learning that, yes, they're running into trouble with the law here as well as anywhere else. But if we have a pro-innovation government, then it's slightly easier to change the law to make these things legal, right? So that's just one area. Here's another example, all right? And this is something that I brought up when I was in Kuwait a couple of months ago talking to the government there, and I was trying to be as subtle as I could so that they would let me leave. And I said, look, Steve Jobs is famous for having done drugs. And if a country wants the kind of creative people, who will create Apple to come, then it's going to be kind of tricky if they're actually illegal, right? Like, no, you can't do drugs, we're going to execute you. And, okay, so Steve Jobs, he's dead in any case. But let's look at the new CEO, right? Little known fact, Tim Cook is gay, right? And so that might be a problem in some countries where it's illegal to be gay. So maybe if you want your society to have a sort of post-industrial, creativity-driven type of economy, you might have to change a few laws, right? But this is a game we already know how to play, right? Remember the controversy of stem cells? In 2001, the US limited federal funding of stem cell research, and in 2003, we built this building, right? So if not for stem cells, we wouldn't all be here today. So I'm optimistic that Singapore will do the right thing when it comes to cryptocurrencies and self-driving cars and collaborative consumption and so on. And that's why I believe that there's never been a better place or a better time for startups than here and now. And I want to see the people in this room working on these big challenges for a very personal reason. Okay, and this is going to be my final thing that I'm going to say. So 100 years ago, Southeast Asia was mostly colonies, right? The Portuguese went to Macau, the Dutch went to Indonesia, the Spanish went to the Philippines, the French went to Vietnam, and the British went to Malaya. Just about the only country that didn't get colonized was Thailand, and pretty much the only European country that didn't come out was Germany. So that might be why the Rocket Internet went straight to Thailand, and now they're catching up with the rest of Asia, right? So I respect what they did, okay? But why did it take a bunch of Germans to show us how to do e-commerce, right? Like, where were the Asian entrepreneurs doing this stuff? And by that, I include all of the new Asians. I don't really care whether you were born here or you moved here. What I do care about is, if you have a big exit, do you take your wealth and go back to Europe and buy a castle, right? Or do you take your wealth and invest it in the next generation of entrepreneurs here? So that's kind of my question to you, right? And that's my challenge to you. I think e-commerce, logistics, payments, healthcare, language, these are real challenges waiting for the right entrepreneur. And I'm really humbled to be in the presence of the people who will solve these problems. Yeah, thumbs up. All right. So, have the judges decided, or shall I take questions?
Take some questions.
Take questions. Yeah, I've judged these things before, and I know how hard it is to come to a consensus. At the end of it, you think these judges back there are like deliberating seriously about like the pros and cons and the business model, but actually they got all of that done in the first like 4 minutes, and now they're just like talking shop. And so I think the prizes will be more random than you might expect. That's all I'm going to say about that. Yeah, any comments, questions? Are the government people going to arrest me now for talking about politics? I don't know. No questions. I'm so glad to see everybody agrees.
Yes. So I just thought I'd transfer the awkwardness to you. I apologize.
No, that's cool.
Big warm round of applause for Meng, everybody. Love what he's doing here. Thank you.